Ahead of the game. UK rules the roots having finance hegemony as EU turns the economics upside down. Post-Brexit shake-up of EU financial services regulation. The UK and EU have already begun to diverge in the way they oversee financial markets as hopes the two will reach a broad agreement on supervisory equivalence in the wake of Brexit fades. The EU's priority is to develop a more harmonised internal capital market. By contrast, UK politicians view Brexit as the chance to return to restore powers and discretion to regulators and exchanges, lost by layers of detailed and prescriptive EU rulemaking. The Treasury has published proposals to reform the way the regulatory framework for the financial services industry should change now that the UK is no longer part of the European Union. John Glenn, Economic Secretary to the Treasury, said that, by taking advantage of the UK's new freedoms, the government wants to build upon our historic strength to renew the UK's position as the world's preeminent financial centre. The UK is looking to go further because its markets, which include Brent crude oil futures, are much bigger and more global, according to three people familiar with the government's thinking. The Future Regulatory Framework, FRF, review will, therefore, play a critical role in delivering the vision for the sector set out by the Chancellor. The FRF review provides a once-in-a-generation opportunity to ensure that, having left the EU, the government maintains a coherent, agile, and internationally respected approach to financial services regulation that is right for the UK. The main change would be to move away from retained EU law as it is difficult and time-consuming to update, and places substantial resource pressure on Parliament, which is asked to consider a large volume of highly technical provisions, the Treasury said. It intends to keep the current framework as it remains the most appropriate way to regulate financial services in the UK, but it will expand it with a greater focus on growth and competitiveness. The changes will also be in line with the UK's commitment to achieve a net zero economy by 2050. In detail, the Treasury added, the government intends to move to a comprehensive FSMA model of financial services regulation, with the appropriate enhancements to ensure that the regime remains fit for the future, and can support the UK's high standards of regulation. This means that the financial services regulators will take responsibility for setting many of the direct regulatory requirements which are currently set out in retained EU law. Direct regulatory requirements are the obligations that firms are expected to follow, with the framework within which the regulators must operate being set by Parliament and the government. Transferring that responsibility to the regulators will require the government to gradually repeal significant amounts of retained EU law so that the regulators can replace it with the appropriate regulatory requirements in their own rule books. The FCA and PRA already have extensive rule-making powers under FSMA, but the Treasury believes they are not sufficiently broad enough to allow them to make rules covering all areas of financial services that the retained EU law legislates on. Initially, the watchdogs will be expected to replace the repealed provisions with rules similar to the ones currently in place. This will ensure that rules are properly tailored for the UK markets and reflect their objectives. Such a move will also give the FCA and PRA the ability to update regulations more efficiently in the future. Balancing Act. Tim Sargison, Chief Executive of Sandringham Financial Partners, told International Advisor that while the move towards greater regulatory independence is welcome, the government should make sure costs to firms and consumers are not affected by the proposed changes. The FCA's operational objectives are to secure an appropriate degree of protection for consumers, protect and enhance the integrity of the UK financial system, and to promote effective competition in the interests of consumers. The regulator must ensure that any burden or restriction via regulation is proportionate to the expected benefits, taking into account costs to firms and consumers. Redress the balance so that the general principle that consumers should take responsibility for their decisions is reinforced, he added.